In the late 19th century, America was a land of opportunity, a place where ambition could transform even the humblest beginnings into unimaginable wealth. Few stories capture this promise and its perils better than that of John Ringling and his family. Born into modest circumstances in rural Baraboo, Wisconsin, John was one of several siblings who would together create what became the largest circus empire in American history, the Ringling Bros Circus. What began as a small traveling show with a handful of animals and performers evolved, under the relentless drive of John and his brothers, into a sprawling spectacle that captivated millions. A dazzling symbol of American ingenuity, entertainment, and excess. But while the circus brought fame and fortune, it also fueled an appetite for grandeur that would eventually lead to one of the most extraordinary and financially consuming homes of the 20th century. Dizan, John Ringling's rise was not merely a story of business acumen. It was a story of vision, obsession, and a relentless desire to leave a mark that would outlast him. By the early 1900s, John had amassed a fortune that allowed him to indulge in the finer things of life, from European art and antiques to opulent jewelry and luxury automobiles. Yet it was his marriage to Mabel Burton Ringling that would redefine his ambitions. Mabel was more than a partner. She was an inspiration. Elegant, cultured, and fiercely interested in the arts, she introduced John to the world of high society and refined taste. Her influence was subtle yet profound, steering him toward the vision of a home that would not only shelter them, but also announce their cultural sophistication to the world. This vision was Dizan, a mansion that would embody love, artistry, and, ultimately, obsession. The idea of Dizan was as grand as its eventual execution. John and Mabel were captivated by the romance and beauty of Venice, Italy, and they wanted their home to reflect that same European grandeur. In Sarasota, Florida, a city that was then a quiet coastal town, they began assembling a property that would become a stage for both private life and public display. Dizan would rise along the shoreline like a Venetian palace transplanted to the Gulf Coast, a gleaming testament to ambition made concrete. But this was no mere replication of Italian architecture. It was an intensely personal creation. Every detail, from the ornate balconies to the sweeping staircases, reflected not only the Ringlings' taste but also their desire to craft a world apart, a home that was a sanctuary, a spectacle, and a legacy all at once. Yet even in the earliest days of its construction, there were whispers of caution. Dizan was unlike anything Sarasota had ever seen, and its costs were staggering. Every imported tile, every hand-carved molding, every priceless artwork that adorned its halls represented both devotion and risk. The mansion demanded more than money. It demanded the full attention of its creators, and it soon became clear that their love for art and grandeur was inexorably entwined with the fragile limits of wealth. John Ringling's fortune, while vast, was finite, and the line between creative ambition and financial overreach was thinner than anyone might have imagined. The story of Dizan is, in many ways, the story of John and Mabel themselves. Brilliant, driven, passionate, and ultimately vulnerable. It is a tale of love expressed through architecture, of a desire to elevate oneself through beauty and culture, and of the seductive power of excess. As the mansion's walls began to rise, so too did the anticipation, the wonder, and the silent tension that would accompany every gilded detail. Dizan would become a living testament to what ambition can achieve, but it would also serve as an early warning of how even the greatest fortunes can be consumed by the very dreams they are meant to support. In this quiet stretch of Florida coast, the Ringlings were not merely building a house. They were building a legend, one that would endure for generations as both a triumph of imagination and a cautionary tale of wealth, obsession, and the human heart. By the time John and Mabel Ringling set their sights on building Dizan, Sarasota was a quiet, almost forgotten stretch of Florida's Gulf Coast, a place of sandy beaches, modest fishing communities, and dense mangroves. To outsiders, it seemed an improbable choice for a home of such monumental ambition, yet to John and Mabel, it was a blank canvas. They purchased a sprawling parcel of land along the shoreline, where the horizon met the calm waters like a painting waiting to be framed. From the very beginning, it was clear that this would not be merely a house, but a living work of art. A structure that could encapsulate not only wealth but the couple's identity, their aspirations, and their devotion to each other. Mabel Ringling, in particular, emerged as the driving force behind the mansion's aesthetic vision. She was an uncommon woman for her time, well-traveled, deeply educated in art and architecture, and possessed of a taste that could rival the most discerning European collectors. Mabel's influence shaped every decision, from the overall design to the smallest ornamental detail. The Ringlings envisioned a Venetian-inspired palace, a home that could rival the grandest villas of Italy's canals, yet they sought to imbue it with a uniquely American spirit. This was no attempt at mimicry. Every element of design was filtered through Mabel's sensibilities. A combination of elegance, theatricality, and a profound understanding of how art could tell a story. The couple engaged the services of the New York architectural firm of Dwight James Baum, whose expertise in Mediterranean revival architecture aligned perfectly with the Ringlings' vision. Baum's designs were ambitious, blending classical Venetian motifs with contemporary innovations in engineering and comfort. It was a marriage of artistry and practicality that reflected both the couple's refined tastes and their desire for a home that could function as a modern residence. The mansion would feature grand salons, sweeping staircases, and elaborately decorated ceilings, but also modern conveniences for the early 20th century, plumbing, electricity, and a design that could accommodate the social demands of the Ringlings' prominent lives. Construction began in earnest in 1924, and it quickly became apparent that the scale of the project was staggering. Skilled artisans were brought from Europe, carpenters and masons whose expertise was essential to bring the Venetian vision to life. Italian plasterers were commissioned to recreate the intricate frescoes and ornamental reliefs that would adorn the ceilings and walls. Tiles were imported directly from Venice, selected individually for their color, pattern, and historic resonance. Every choice was deliberate, every detail painstakingly considered. Card design was a labor of obsession, one that blurred the line between architecture and art, and between devotion and indulgence. The interior design of the mansion was equally meticulous. Mabel personally curated an extraordinary collection of furnishings, tapestries, and artworks, many of them acquired from European estates and galleries. She understood the psychological power of a room, how color, texture, and light could evoke emotion, status, and prestige. The salons were designed to impress and inspire, their walls adorned with portraits, mirrors, and gilded accents that reflected both natural light and the Ringling status as cultural patrons. Every piece had a story, a provenance, and a purpose. This was not decoration for its own sake. It was storytelling through space, an immersive narrative that communicated wealth, taste, and sophistication without a single word. Yet, as the mansion took shape, the costs escalated at a pace that few outside the couple could comprehend. The Ringlings were committed to authenticity, insisting on the finest materials and the most skilled artisans. Marble from Italy, bronze fixtures, hand-carved wooden doors, and murals painted by renowned European artists all were part of a vision that had no apparent limit. Each addition seemed small in isolation but enormous in aggregate. The mansion's walls themselves became a symbol of ambition, towering, elaborate, impossibly detailed, and relentlessly consuming of time, resources, and fortune. Beyond the financial implications, Card design represented a profound personal project for John and Mabel. It was a declaration of identity, a space that would capture their lives, their love, and their shared obsession with culture and beauty. For John, the mansion was a retreat from the relentless pressures of the circus empire, a sanctuary where he could indulge in art, entertain influential guests, and imagine a life beyond the transient chaos of the circus world. For Mabel, it was a canvas on which to realize her lifelong fascination with European art, history, and architecture. Together, they constructed not just a home, but a stage on which their lives and ultimately their legacy would play out. The Ringlings' ambition was not limited to the mansion itself. Surrounding Car Design were meticulously planned gardens, reflecting pools and walkways that extended the theatricality of the house into the landscape. Inspired by Venetian palaces, these gardens were designed to be experienced sequentially, each view a carefully framed tableau. Statues and fountains punctuated the grounds, creating visual rhythm and emphasizing the mansion's grandeur from every angle. The grounds, like the house, were a form of storytelling, guiding visitors along a path that celebrated the couple's wealth, taste, and cultivated image. Yet, as with many monumental endeavors, the grandeur of Car Design was inseparable from the pressures it created. The Ringlings' obsession with perfection drove construction delays, escalated costs, and heightened the emotional intensity of the project. Every decision became a test of endurance and vision. Even minor setbacks threatened to disrupt the delicate balance of artistry and practicality. Yet John and Mabel persisted, committed not only to the completion of the mansion, but to the realization of their dream in the exact form they had imagined. Their determination was remarkable, but it also hinted at the shadow side of ambition, the insatiable appetite for beauty that could consume not only resources but the very sense of proportion and prudence taught by the late 1920s. Car Design began to take its final shape. Visitors marveled at the scale and elegance, at the way Venetian aesthetics had been transplanted to the Florida coastline with an authenticity that was almost otherworldly. Every room, every hallway, every balcony seemed to tell a story, not just of wealth and taste, but of love, obsession, and the pursuit of an ideal. Yet behind the public admiration was a private reality. The mansion was becoming a financial leviathan, a project whose ambition threatened to exceed the very fortune that had made it possible. Car Design was more than a house. It was a reflection of the Ringlings themselves, magnificent, cultured, and perilously vulnerable to the cost of their dreams. As the construction of Car Design progressed, the mansion began to take on a life of its own, evolving from a collection of architectural plans into a sprawling, tangible testament to the Ringlings' vision. Every inch of the house was carefully orchestrated, a harmony of form and function, yet the scope of the project began to reveal the true magnitude of their ambition. Venetian influences were evident in every archway, column, and courtyard, but the mansion was more than a simple replica. It was an interpretation, a fusion of European artistry and American ingenuity, filtered through Mabel Ringling's exacting eye. She insisted on authenticity, traveling frequently to Italy and Europe to procure the finest materials, from hand-carved stonework to Murano glass chandeliers. Each element was carefully selected to create a seamless aesthetic, a cohesive narrative that would unfold as one moved from room to room. Inside, the mansion's interiors were a revelation. Grand halls featured sweeping staircases, their balustrades sculpted with intricate patterns, while ceilings soared into expansive frescoes, depicting mythological scenes and allegories of prosperity and art. Walls were adorned with Venetian plaster, painstakingly layered to create a texture that seemed both ancient and alive. The floors were laid with imported marble in elaborate geometric patterns, reflecting both light and the Ringlings' wealth. Each room was a theater in itself, designed to evoke emotion and admiration, to impress visitors with the sheer audacity of the couple's vision. Mabel was involved in every decision, from the placement of furniture to the orientation of windows, ensuring that the mansion's story was consistent and deliberate, a reflection of their combined personalities and passions. The mansion was not only a work of art, but also a demonstration of the Ringlings' desire to transcend the transient nature of the circus empire. John Ringling, despite his flamboyant career in entertainment, sought permanence, a legacy that would outlast both the circus and the fleeting fame it brought. Car Design became an emblem of this aspiration, a physical manifestation of wealth, taste, and cultural influence. He and Mabel intended the mansion to serve not merely as a home, but as a venue for social gatherings, art exhibitions, and philanthropic activities. The Ringlings' social ambitions were intertwined with the mansion's design, with expansive salons and reception areas built to host the elite of America's upper class, patrons of the arts and influential figures from across the globe. Yet, even as Quai d'Izan neared completion, the scale of the project began to strain the couple's resources. The costs of importing materials from Europe, commissioning specialized artisans, and executing intricate decorative work grew exponentially. Every decision carried weight: a choice of tile, a carved detail, a fresco placement. What may have seemed minor to an outsider was, in reality, a critical piece of the mansion's overall narrative. The Ringlings were acutely aware that a misstep could compromise the integrity of the design. Their commitment to perfection often led to delays and increased expenditures, a tension between artistic vision and financial reality that loomed over the project. Mabel's insistence on the authenticity of each decorative element meant that artisans from Venice and other parts of Europe were employed for months, sometimes years, to ensure that even the smallest detail met her exacting standards. Murals, carved wood, mosaics and decorative metalwork were scrutinized repeatedly, reflecting a near-obsessive pursuit of artistic excellence. It was not enough for the work to be beautiful. It had to be historically accurate, culturally resonant, and emotionally impactful. This meticulous attention to detail gave the mansion an unmatched sense of sophistication, but also contributed to the relentless consumption of the Ringlings' fortune. Despite the mounting pressures, Quai d'Izan quickly became a symbol of the Ringlings' prominence in taste. Local residents watched as the palace emerged from the sand and scrubland, its towers and red-tiled roofs asserting themselves against the Floridian skyline. Tourists and dignitaries were drawn to the site, fascinated by the audacity of building a Venetian palace on the Gulf Coast. The mansion's presence transformed Sarasota from a quiet coastal town into a burgeoning center of culture and luxury, marking the Ringlings not only as patrons of the arts, but also as shapers of the social landscape. The Ringlings' collection of art and furnishings further elevated the mansion's prestige. Mabel traveled extensively to acquire paintings, tapestries, sculptures, and rare artifacts, curating a collection that rivaled those of established European estates. Every object was selected for its beauty, historical significance, and ability to enhance the narrative of Quai d'Izan. Rooms were designed around the pieces they would house, creating an immersive experience that guided visitors through the mansion's story. From elaborate Venetian mirrors to intricate Persian carpets, the mansion became a living gallery, a space where architecture and fine art converged in a singular vision. Social life at Quai d'Izan reflected the mansion's grandeur. The Ringlings hosted lavish parties, drawing the elite from New York, Chicago, and beyond. The gatherings were carefully orchestrated, with Mabel overseeing details ranging from floral arrangements to the arrangement of chairs, ensuring that each event was both aesthetically pleasing and socially significant. These occasions reinforced the Ringling status, their home serving as both a private sanctuary and a public stage on which their lives and tastes were displayed. The mansion, in this sense, was inseparable from the couple's identity. It was both a personal retreat and a tool of social influence, a testament to the power of wealth and vision when wielded with determination and taste. Yet, the very ambition that made Quai d'Izan extraordinary also made it perilous. The relentless pursuit of perfection, the insistence on the finest materials and craftsmanship, and the desire to create a home that could rival European palaces placed enormous strain on the Ringlings' finances. John, despite his success in the circus industry, found that even immense wealth could be eclipsed by the cost of living art at such an unprecedented scale. The mansion became a financial crucible, a space where ambition and resource collided. Each decorative choice, each imported artifact, each architectural flourish carried both aesthetic and economic weight. Quai d'Izan was a triumph of vision, but it was also a cautionary tale of how creativity, desire, and prestige could consume a fortune almost as quickly as it was amassed. By the late 1920s, the mansion had achieved the grandeur the Ringlings had envisioned. It was a Venetian palace transplanted to the Florida coast, complete with arcades, towers, reflecting pools, and gardens. Visitors marveled at the detail and scale, at the seamless integration of art, architecture, and landscape. Yet behind the awe-inspiring facade, the costs had mounted beyond expectation. Labor disputes, material shortages, and the exacting standards imposed by Mabel contributed to delays and escalating expenditures. The mansion, magnificent as it was, had become an instrument of both cultural influence and financial peril. A duality that would define its legacy and the lives of those who inhabited it. Kizan, in its completed form, represented more than wealth. It was a narrative frozen in time. It told the story of ambition, of love, of obsession with beauty and culture. Every column, every fresco, every imported tile was a testament to the Ringling's vision and dedication. Yet it was also a reminder of the fragile balance between aspiration and pragmatism, between the desire to create a masterpiece and the reality of sustaining it. The mansion stood as a beacon of refinement, elegance, and art, but beneath its polished surfaces lay the costs of excess, the pressures of perfection, and the shadow of a fortune being inexorably consumed. In the end, Gilded Age was more than a home. It was an embodiment of the Ringlings themselves, a couple who sought to live among art, beauty, and culture, who pursued a vision that was simultaneously inspiring and ruinous. The mansion would not only define Sarasota for generations to come, but also serve as a symbol of the human capacity for creation and obsession, for love and indulgence, and for the delicate interplay between vision and reality. The story of Gilded Age at this stage is one of triumph and caution, a tale that would continue to unfold as the Ringlings navigated the consequences of their ambition. And as the mansion became both their greatest achievement and their most consuming challenge. As Gilded Age reached its full splendor, the mansion was no longer merely a home. It had become a stage upon which the lives of John and Mabel Ringling played out with remarkable intensity. Every aspect of their daily existence was intertwined with the palace they had created. From the moment the sun cast its first golden rays upon the red-tiled roof to the late evenings spent under the soft glow of Venetian chandeliers, the Ringlings moved through their home with deliberate purpose, their routines reflecting both the grandeur of their surroundings and the deep, personal investment they had poured into every corner of the estate. Mabel, ever the curator, ensured that every room told a story of art, of travel, of refined taste, while John navigated the mansion as both a private retreat and a symbol of his accumulated power and influence. The interplay between their personalities was mirrored in the very architecture of the house. Mabel's attention to detail and John's flair for spectacle were woven seamlessly into the design, creating spaces that were as functional as they were breathtaking. The social life that revolved around Gilded Age was unparalleled for the time. The Ringling soirees became legendary, attracting the cultural and economic elite from across the United States and Europe. High society was drawn not only to the mansion's architectural beauty, but also to the curated atmosphere that Mabel meticulously crafted. Each event was orchestrated with the precision of a theatrical production. The placement of furniture, the arrangement of flowers, the selection of music, and even the menu were chosen to complement the mansion's aesthetic and to convey the Ringling's sophistication. Guests often remarked on the seamless fusion of art and hospitality, where every corridor, gallery, and hall contributed to an immersive experience of wealth, taste, and culture. These gatherings were more than social functions. They were declarations of the Ringlings' identity, a means of asserting their position in an elite world that valued both lineage and refinement. Mabel's role in the mansion extended far beyond social planning. She was an artist and a collector, and Gilded Age became a canvas for her vision. The interiors reflected her travels and her obsession with European artistry, particularly Venetian styles of the Renaissance and Baroque periods. Murals depicting allegorical figures, frescoes of mythical scenes, and intricate wood carvings adorned the walls and ceilings, creating a sense of walking through a European palace transported to the Gulf Coast. The selection of furniture, textiles, and decorative objects was equally meticulous. Persian rugs, hand-painted ceramics, and tapestries imported from Italy and France filled the rooms, each chosen to harmonize with the architecture and the artwork, creating an environment of unparalleled elegance. Even the smallest details, the handles on doors, the wrought iron grills, the patterns of the floor tiles were scrutinized, reflecting Mabel's uncompromising standards. Yet behind the elegance and refinement of cut design lay the unrelenting pressures of maintaining such a vast estate. The Ringlings' fortune, while immense, was continuously tested by the costs associated with operating and furnishing a mansion of this scale. Staff wages, maintenance of imported materials, and the ongoing commissioning of artworks created a financial burden that weighed heavily on John and Mabel. The couple employed dozens of domestic workers, gardeners, and specialized artisans to manage the property, each contributing to the daily operation and upkeep of the home. Yet even as Quai d'Izan functioned as a paradise of comfort and beauty, it demanded constant attention and resources, a duality that would define the Ringlings' lives in the years to come. John Ringling's personal identity was inseparable from the mansion. As a man who had built his fortune in the spectacle-driven circus industry, he had always been fascinated by display, grandeur, and the impression of permanence. Quai d'Izan represented the ultimate manifestation of this fascination, a home that would endure, that would speak to generations about his taste, wealth, and cultural vision. He walked the halls with a sense of ownership, not only over the property, but over the narrative it conveyed. Guests, friends, and business associates often commented on the way John used the mansion to impress, to negotiate, and to solidify relationships, understanding that every gesture, every tour of the estate reinforced his stature in society. Meanwhile, Mabel Ringling's influence over the mansion and its operation was equally profound. She had been the guiding force behind the interiors, the artistic acquisitions, and the curation of social experiences. Her insistence on authenticity and historical accuracy created a home that was unmatched in its cultural sophistication. She drew inspiration from European palaces she had visited, studying architectural nuances and decorative techniques, and translating them into a uniquely American context. Her efforts extended beyond mere aesthetics. She sought to educate, to inspire, and to elevate the cultural life of Sarasota through Quai d'Izan. The mansion became a hub for artists, musicians, and intellectuals, reflecting her belief that art and culture were essential components of a refined life. The Ringlings' art collection, carefully displayed throughout the mansion, was a reflection of both personal taste and public ambition. Paintings, sculptures, and decorative objects were chosen not only for their beauty, but for their ability to convey prestige and knowledge. Each gallery within Quai d'Izan was designed to showcase specific themes, allowing visitors to move through the space as if traveling through history itself. Venetian paintings hung alongside French tapestries. Renaissance sculptures were juxtaposed with decorative objects from Asia and the Middle East. The experience of moving through the mansion was one of discovery, where each turn revealed a new layer of artistic insight or cultural significance. This immersive approach to art collecting demonstrated the Ringlings' commitment to intellectual as well as aesthetic excellence, despite the elegance and sophistication. Tensions were never far beneath the surface. The financial strain of maintaining the mansion, coupled with John's ambitious spending on art and business ventures, created ongoing pressure. Even as Quai d'Izan attracted admiration and envy, it demanded relentless labor, attention, and financial commitment. The Ringlings were acutely aware that the mansion, for all its beauty, could also become a source of vulnerability. The desire to maintain perfection and social preeminence was a constant balancing act, one that required both strategic thinking and personal sacrifice. The gardens and outdoor spaces of Quai d'Izan were integral to its impact. Mabel designed extensive formal gardens, reflecting both Mediterranean and Venetian influences, with fountains reflecting pools, and sculptural elements creating outdoor rooms as rich in detail as the interiors. Strolling through these gardens, Visitors experienced a continuity between interior and exterior, where art and nature merged seamlessly. These landscapes were carefully planned to frame the mansion's architecture, to provide vistas that enhanced the visual drama, and to reinforce the sense that design existed as a cohesive work of art rather than a mere dwelling. Design also played a role in shaping Sarasota itself. The mansion attracted attention, tourism, and investment, transforming the city into a cultural destination. John and Mabel Ringling's influence extended beyond the walls of their estate, promoting the arts, supporting local infrastructure, and elevating the region's social profile. The mansion became both a symbol of their vision and a tool through which they exercised influence, demonstrating how architecture, art, and personal ambition could intersect to leave a lasting mark on a community. Ultimately, life at Dizan during this period was a mixture of triumph and tension. The Ringlings had achieved a level of artistic and social sophistication that few Americans could rival, creating a home that was as remarkable for its beauty as it was for its cultural resonance. Yet the mansion was also a test of endurance, wealth, and personal discipline. It demanded constant care, creativity, and vigilance, reminding the Ringlings that even the most extraordinary achievements come with hidden costs. Dizan was more than a home. It was a living embodiment of ambition, taste, and the complex interplay between personal desire and social expectation. A narrative that would continue to unfold as the Ringlings navigated both the glory and the pressures of their Venetian palace in Florida. By the time Dizan neared completion, the grandeur of the mansion had already begun to exact a profound toll on the Ringling fortune. What had started as an ambitious vision of opulence and cultural sophistication quickly evolved into a financial maelstrom, one that would test the limits of John and Mabel Ringling's wealth, their relationship, and their personal endurance. Every gilded ceiling, every hand-carved column, every imported mosaic tile carried a cost far beyond its material value. John Ringling, the consummate showman who had built an empire from the spectacle of the circus, now found himself navigating the very real complexities of wealth management in an era where fortune could be both dazzling and dangerously fleeting. While the Ringlings' contemporaries admired their ability to translate personal taste into architectural reality, few understood the relentless pressure that Dizan imposed on the family's finances. The mansion had become, in many ways, a living entity that consumed both money and time, demanding a constant stream of resources to maintain its illusion of perfection. Construction itself became a prolonged ordeal, fraught with logistical challenges and escalating costs. The Ringlings had envisioned Dizan as an American reflection of Venetian splendor, and achieving that vision required importing materials from Europe, commissioning artisans who could reproduce the intricate techniques of Renaissance and Baroque masters, and overseeing a workforce that often struggled to meet the exacting standards of the couple. Marble had to be quarried in Italy and shipped across the Atlantic. Tiles were crafted in specialized workshops in Venice, and frescoes were painted by artists who demanded meticulous attention to every brushstroke. The cost of shipping, labor, and customs duties added layers of expense that exceeded even John Ringling's initial projections. Delays were frequent as artisans corrected mistakes, as the subtropical climate of Florida tested the durability of materials, and as the sheer scale of the mansion required coordination of dozens of contractors and hundreds of workers simultaneously. Each delay brought both frustration and additional financial strain, turning the dream of a Venetian palace into an ongoing exercise in patience, negotiation, and cash flow management. Yet it was not merely construction costs that drained the Ringlings' resources. The operation and furnishing of Dizan introduced an entirely new dimension of financial demand. Every room needed appropriate furniture, every wall required art, and every surface demanded decorative objects that reflected the couple's vision of cultural sophistication. Mabel Ringling, with her acute sense of artistry and historical authenticity, rejected mediocrity. She sought authenticity, insisting on genuine European antiques and custom-made reproductions that would harmonize with the mansion's architectural style. The result was a house that, from floor to ceiling, breathed elegance, but whose acquisition costs pushed the boundaries of the couple's fortune. Beyond the initial purchases, the ongoing maintenance of the mansion's interiors became a major expense. Polishing Venetian mirrors, cleaning imported tapestries, repairing marble floors, and restoring murals damaged by humidity required specialized labor that was both costly and continuous. In many ways, Ca Dizan was not a static home, but a living organism that demanded constant attention. A reality that underscored the mansion's dual nature as both a masterpiece and a financial burden. The Ringlings' art collection alone represented a significant portion of their expenditure. Paintings, sculptures, tapestries, and decorative objects were sourced from galleries, auctions, and private collections across Europe. John Ringling, though known primarily for his business acumen, shared Mabel's passion for artistic legacy. He understood that the mansion was not merely a home but a cultural statement, a demonstration of taste, knowledge, and permanence. Yet the art acquisitions were far from a simple matter of purchasing what appealed aesthetically. Each piece had to complement the overall design of the mansion, its architectural proportions, and its thematic vision. The Ringlings invested heavily in Renaissance and Baroque works, Venetian glass, and French decorative arts. Each item carefully curated to contribute to the mansion's immersive environment. While these collections elevated Ca Dizan into the realm of an American palace, they also intensified the financial pressure, revealing the delicate balance between cultural ambition and fiscal prudence. Operating a mansion of this scale required not only financial resources but also an extensive staff. Dozens of domestic workers were employed to ensure that daily life ran smoothly, from chefs and housekeepers to groundskeepers and specialty artisans. Managing this workforce was a constant logistical challenge, as the Ringlings sought individuals who could meet the standards of service expected in a home of such refinement. Training, supervision, and compensation added another layer of complexity to the financial demands. The gardens, fountains, and outdoor spaces, meticulously designed to reflect Venetian and Mediterranean influences, required daily attention. Mabel oversaw the planting and pruning of exotic flora, the maintenance of reflecting pools, and the preservation of sculptural elements, each task demanding both labor and expertise. In essence, Ca Dizan operated less like a private residence and more like a small institution, one that required constant vigilance, management, and investment. The financial pressures were compounded by John Ringling's other ventures. Though the circus had been the source of the Ringlings' initial fortune, by the 1920s it faced increasing competition and operational challenges. John's investments in real estate, banking, and other enterprises further strained liquidity, as profits fluctuated and market conditions shifted unpredictably. While Ca Dizan symbolized the pinnacle of his ambition, it also represented a concentration of capital in a single, immovable asset, one that could not easily be liquidated in times of financial difficulty. The mansion's very scale and opulence, once a point of pride, became a source of vulnerability, highlighting the intricate interplay between personal desire, societal expectation, and economic reality. Despite these pressures, the Ringlings continued to expand the mansion's cultural footprint. John and Mabel hosted artists, musicians, and intellectuals, transforming Ca Dizan into a hub of cultural exchange. These activities reinforced the mansion's reputation, attracting attention from the press and visitors from across the nation. Yet every event, every acquisition, every renovation carried financial consequences. The Ringlings were aware that the cost of maintaining the mansion's splendor was relentless, and that their fortune, though substantial, was being eroded incrementally by the very pursuit of magnificence that had made Ca Dizan famous. The mansion's construction and upkeep also exposed the couple to social scrutiny. Their extravagant spending drew admiration, but also criticism from peers and the public alike. In an era where displays of wealth were both celebrated and condemned, the Ringlings' commitment to their Venetian dream became a topic of fascination and debate. To some, Ca Dizan epitomized the American ideal of cultural refinement. To others, it symbolized excess and hubris. The Ringlings were acutely aware of this duality, understanding that every artistic choice and Architectural flourish was simultaneously a statement of taste and a potential source of controversy. Ultimately, Car design during this period was a study in contrasts. It was a testament to the Ringling's vision, taste, and ambition. Yet it was also a relentless financial drain, a constant source of tension, and a reminder of the fragility inherent in even the most dazzling displays of wealth. The mansion embodied the very qualities that defined the Gilded Age elite: an appetite for beauty, a desire for cultural immortality, and a willingness to risk fortune in the pursuit of legacy. For John and Mabel Ringling, Kai Dizan was both triumph and trial. A palace that elevated their social and cultural status while simultaneously consuming the resources and energies that had made such achievement possible. By the mid-1920s, it became clear that Kai Dizan was more than a home. It was a crucible, testing the limits of ambition, wealth, and personal resilience. Every decision, from commissioning a mural to importing rare marble, from hosting lavish events to expanding the gardens, reinforced the mansion's dual nature as both masterpiece and financial albatross. The Ringlings had created a home that would be admired for generations. Yet it was a home whose very existence foreshadowed the delicate balance between opulence and overreach. A lesson in the enduring costs of turning dreams into reality on a scale few could ever imagine. By the time Quai d'Izal had reached its full grandeur, the mansion was no longer simply a home. It had become the stage upon which the private lives of John and Mabel Ringling were played out. A private theater where wealth, ambition, and personal desire collided with isolation, expectation, and the relentless demands of opulence. For Mabel, the mansion was both a canvas and a cage. She had invested herself wholly into the creation of a domestic environment that reflected her taste, her intellect, and her understanding of European refinement. Each hand-painted fresco, each intricate mosaic, each gilded fixture was a testament to her insistence on authenticity and perfection. Yet, while the mansion celebrated her vision, it also imposed a suffocating routine of supervision, oversight, and endless decision-making. She spent hours negotiating with artisans, arranging art acquisitions, consulting with architects, and directing the placement of furniture, objects, and decorative details. The grandeur that fascinated visitors concealed the reality that daily life at Car d'Izan demanded near-constant management. John Ringling, by contrast, approached the mansion with a combination of pride, indulgence, and occasional frustration. The home reflected his success, his ability to translate a circus-built fortune into tangible cultural and social prestige, and his desire to be remembered as more than an entertainer of crowds. He reveled in the spectacle, hosting elaborate gatherings, welcoming artists, dignitaries, and patrons of the arts, and using Quai d'Izan as a tool to assert his standing among the American elite. Yet beneath this exterior of composure, John was acutely aware of the pressures imposed by such a vast and intricate household. The management of staff, the upkeep of imported materials, the preservation of delicate artworks, and the ongoing costs of entertaining and travel all added to a sense of burden that was seldom visible to guests. While the mansion provided a platform for social performance, it also created a hidden strain that colored his daily life and personal relationships. The private life of the Ringlings within Quai d'Izan was characterized by a delicate tension between intimacy and public display. Though the mansion was their sanctuary, it was also a public monument, a space that demanded appearances, rehearsed hospitality, and adherence to social expectation. Mabel, deeply invested in the mansion's aesthetic, often prioritized the home's perfection over domestic ease, while John's enjoyment of the space was frequently mediated by considerations of status, legacy, and ongoing financial strain. The couple's relationship, once marked by shared ambition and a sense of adventure, now faced the subtle pressures that accompany the management of extraordinary wealth. Even small disagreements over design, staffing, or financial decisions could escalate in the context of a home that was as much an enterprise as it was a residence. The scale of Car d'Izan also redefined privacy. The mansion's numerous guest suites, entertainment halls, and landscape gardens invited visitors at all hours. and even the most routine domestic moments were often punctuated by the presence of staff, tradespeople, or society acquaintances. John and Mabel's attempts to carve out intimate spaces were complicated by the practical demands of running a house of such magnitude. Mabel's chambers, meticulously arranged and adorned, became a locus of personal retreat, yet even these spaces were not immune from the intrusion of household responsibilities or the visits of admirers and collaborators. Similarly, John's studies and offices, where he conducted business or indulged in private reflection, were constantly linked to the operational and social functions of the estate, reminding him that even solitude came at a price in a home of monumental ambition. The mansion's physical environment amplified the emotional pressures of daily life. Florida's subtropical climate challenged the preservation of the imported Italian marble, Venetian plaster, and delicate European fabrics that adorned the interiors. Humidity threatened murals, woodwork, and tapestries, while the intense sun risked fading paint and fabric. Maintaining the mansion's aesthetic required constant vigilance, yet these efforts were never complete. The home demanded ongoing attention, repairs, and preventive measures. For the Ringlings, this meant a near-perpetual cycle of supervision, communication with artisans, and personal oversight of maintenance crews. The physical grandeur of Quai d'Izan, which inspired awe and admiration, also created a pervasive sense of responsibility and obligation that infiltrated the couple's personal lives, shaping the rhythms of daily existence and constraining freedom of movement beyond the practical and aesthetic challenges. The mansion exerted a subtle psychological weight. The Ringlings were not merely caretakers of a house. They were stewards of a living cultural artifact, responsible for preserving its beauty, integrity, and legacy. This awareness, while a source of pride, also brought anxiety. Every crack in a fresco, every misplaced object, every mismanaged event became a potential failure, a threat to the image they had worked so meticulously to construct. For Mabel, whose identity was deeply intertwined with the mansion's visual and artistic coherence, these pressures could be intense, sometimes leading to moments of frustration or exhaustion. John, accustomed to the performative demands of the circus, faced the challenge of translating managerial skill into domestic governance, finding that the stakes in the private sphere were often as unforgiving as those of the public arena. Social obligations added another layer of complexity to life within Quai d'Izan. The mansion became a magnet for artists, socialites, and visiting dignitaries, each expecting hospitality that matched the home's grandeur. Hosting such gatherings required elaborate planning, precise coordination of staff, and often significant financial outlay. From formal dinners and concerts to more informal receptions, the Ringlings were constantly engaged in performing social rituals that reinforced their status but also consumed their time, energy, and resources. These social demands, while rewarding in terms of prestige, underscored the tension between the mansion's role as a private sanctuary and its function as a public stage. The mansion also shaped the Ringlings' personal routines. Days were structured around the practicalities of overseeing the house and its grounds, consulting with artisans and designers, and maintaining the aesthetic and operational integrity of the property. Leisure was often intertwined with supervision, as walks through gardens or visits to studios doubled as inspections of workmanship and progress. Even the most intimate domestic rituals, morning breakfasts, evening conversations, or personal reflection were influenced by the mansion's scale, complexity, and expectations. In many ways, Quai d'Izan became a framework within which the Ringlings' personal lives were enacted, shaping behaviors, priorities, and relationships with each other and with the world outside the estate. Despite the pressures, the mansion also provided unparalleled opportunities for cultural enrichment and personal fulfillment. Mabel's interest in art and design found daily expression in the mansion's decoration and curation, while John's love of social performance and hospitality was realized through entertaining and public engagement. Together, they cultivated an environment that blended domestic life with artistic patronage, positioning Quai d'Izan as both a home and a locus of cultural influence. The mansion's presence, though demanding, also allowed the Ringlings to engage with a level of aesthetic sophistication, intellectual curiosity, and social prominence that few Americans could aspire to achieve. Yet as the years progressed, the weight of courtesan became more apparent. Financial strain, physical upkeep, social obligations, and psychological pressures combined to create an environment in which the pursuit of perfection came at a tangible personal cost. The Ringlings' health, emotional resilience, and interpersonal dynamics were inevitably affected by the demands of the mansion, revealing the hidden consequences of extreme wealth and the human cost of creating and maintaining a living masterpiece. In this sense, courtesan was not only a monument to ambition and taste, but also a mirror reflecting the complex interplay of desire, responsibility, and the limitations of even the greatest fortunes. Ultimately, Section 6 reveals that courtesan was as much a psychological and emotional force as a physical one. For John and Mabel, it was a home, a stage, a laboratory of art and culture, and a relentless test of endurance. Its beauty and grandeur were inseparable from its demands, shaping daily life, influencing personal relationships, and defining the lived experience of the Ringlings in ways that few outsiders could ever fully understand. The mansion consumed not only wealth but attention, energy, and identity, becoming a crucible in which ambition, artistry, and human vulnerability were inextricably entwined. By the mid-1920s, courtesan had become more than just a home. It was a symbol of cultural ambition, social sophistication, and the aspirations of an American elite striving to claim its place among the world's established aristocracies. For the Ringlings, the mansion represented both personal achievement and public performance. The grandeur of its architecture, the richness of its imported materials, and the meticulous artistry of its interiors were designed not only to satisfy their own tastes but to impress, influence, and command recognition from the wider social sphere. Each event hosted within its walls was carefully choreographed to reflect the family's cultivated image. Guests entered a world of gilded ceilings, Venetian-inspired murals, and Italian marble floors that seemed to transport them across the Atlantic. From the tropical warmth of Sarasota to the refined palaces of Europe, it was a deliberate act of cultural positioning. The Ringlings were not merely wealthy Americans. They were connoisseurs, patrons, and arbiters of taste. The social calendar of courtesan was dense, demanding, and intricate. The Ringlings entertained artists, musicians, politicians, and influential figures, creating an environment where cultural exchange, networking, and performance were inseparable. Mabel's acute sense of aesthetics dictated that every dinner, reception, and informal gathering align with the mansion's overall artistic narrative. Floral arrangements, table settings, and even the sequencing of courses were orchestrated with the same precision applied to murals and mosaics. These events were not casual. They were performative, a demonstration of refinement, hospitality, and subtle power. For John, the mansion provided a stage upon which to project his accomplishments, cultivate alliances, and establish a social legacy that extended beyond the circus empire. The Ringlings understood that in an era when wealth alone was no longer sufficient to secure social legitimacy, the cultivation of cultural capital was equally essential. Guests who crossed the threshold of courtesan were immediately confronted with a fusion of spectacle and intimacy. The mansion's formal spaces, the grand salon, the Venetian-style ballroom, and the loggia overlooking Sarasota Bay were designed to awe. Yet the Ringlings balanced public display with moments of personal engagement. Artists might be shown through private galleries. Politicians could converse with John in his study, and favored friends were invited to enjoy the secluded gardens. This duality of grandeur and intimacy, of public spectacle and private connection, allowed the Ringlings to craft an identity that was simultaneously approachable and aspirational, human and mythic. They were Americans with extraordinary means, yet their home suggested a lineage of sophistication and taste that rivaled the European aristocracy. The impact of courtesan extended beyond social impression to cultural influence. The Ringlings were patrons of the arts at a moment when American cultural identity was still being defined. By importing artworks, commissioning decorative schemes, and hosting performances within the mansion. It contributed to a broader dialogue about taste, refinement, and cultural legitimacy. Mabel's passion for authentic Italian craftsmanship brought skilled artisans to Sarasota, while John's fascination with theater and spectacle infused the home's social life with drama and flourish. Quai d'Izan became a site where European tradition intersected with American ambition, a cultural laboratory that experimented with the possibilities of wealth used to shape experience, influence perception, and elevate the arts. The Ringlings' efforts to cultivate social capital were also entwined with the practical realities of their wealth. Hosting elaborate gatherings was expensive, labor-intensive, and logistically demanding. Staff numbers swelled during events, requiring coordination of domestic personnel, chefs, musicians, and service staff. Transportation and accommodation for guests, particularly those arriving from other states or countries, added layers of complexity. Yet these efforts were not solely performative. They were essential to maintaining the social network that underpinned the Ringlings' influence. Relationships forged within Quai d'Izan's walls could translate into patronage, business opportunities, and lasting cultural connections. The mansion functioned as both a domestic space and a tool of social strategy, demonstrating that, in the world of elite America, influence was inseparable from hospitality and presentation. Public perception of Quai d'Izan was shaped by both proximity and distance. Sarasota residents and local media were fascinated by the mansion, often portraying it as a wonder of modern architecture and luxury. Journalists described the imported Italian marble, the frescoed ceilings, and the opulent furnishings in meticulous detail, highlighting the Ringlings' taste and ambition. Yet there was an undercurrent of ambivalence. Some observers marveled at the aesthetic achievement, while others questioned the extravagance, wondering whether such displays of wealth were prudent or appropriate in a country still recovering from the upheavals of World War I and the Spanish influenza pandemic. This duality admiration mixed with suspicion mirrored broader national attitudes toward the accumulation and display of extreme wealth, a tension that the Ringlings navigated with skill and intentioulalit. The mansion's social influence also extended into the arts and entertainment worlds. Musicians performed in the Grand Salon, painters and sculptors were invited to study and display their works, and literary figures were welcomed into the intimate spaces of the Ringlings' private quarters. By fostering such connections, the mansion became a hub of cultural production, a place where creativity could be incubated under the auspices of wealth and taste. Mabel's attention to detail ensured that each interaction reinforced the mansion's reputation as a site of refinement, while John's charisma and theatrical sensibility made guests feel both honored and entertained. The Ringlings' dual approach of meticulous curation and dynamic engagement helped establish Quai d'Izan as a unique cultural landmark, one that bridged private domesticity with public cultural influence. Despite the outward success of the mansion as a social and cultural venue, there were tensions inherent in sustaining such a lifestyle. The financial burden of continuous hospitality, the expectations of guests, and the labor required to maintain both the mansion and its social cachet created pressures that were often invisible to outsiders. John and Mabel were forced to balance their enjoyment of the mansion's beauty and social potential with the pragmatic realities of wealth management and operational oversight. Every lavish party and meticulously curated gathering came with the knowledge that missteps could tarnish reputation, diminish influence, or create logistical nightmares. The mansion, in its dual role as home and stage, required constant vigilance and negotiation, shaping daily life in ways that were both exhilarating and exhausting. Quai d'Izan's social and cultural role was further amplified by its location. Sarasota, a developing city on Florida's Gulf Coast, became intertwined with the mansion's presence. The Ringlings were not only residents but also civic figures whose taste, philanthropy, and influence shaped the emerging identity of the region. Quai d'Izan became a symbol of the city's aspirations, its potential to attract attention and investment, and its connection to the wider currents of American wealth and culture. Residents were drawn to the mansion as a site of fascination, while visitors from across the country came to witness the grandeur and experience the curated world of the Ringlings firsthand. The mansion thus operated on multiple levels as a personal home, a social instrument, a cultural hub, and a civic landmark. Yet for all its success, the mansion's social life was not without paradox. The more Dizan was celebrated and admired, the more it imposed constraints on the Ringlings' personal freedom. Each gathering, however enjoyable, reinforced the expectations of wealth, taste, and conduct. The mansion's very success became a subtle form of obligation, tying the family's identity to the maintenance of its public image. The Ringlings were constantly negotiating between personal desire and social expectation, between the pleasures of hospitality and the demands of performance. In this sense, Dizan's social grandeur mirrored the mansion's physical magnitude. It inspired awe, influenced perception, and commanded attention. Yet it also shaped behavior, dictated routines, and constrained personal autonomy. Ultimately, Section 7 reveals that Dizan's social and cultural impact was inseparable from the lived experience of the Ringlings. The mansion was both a tool and a burden, a stage for performance and a crucible for identity. Its walls contained more than marble and fresco. They held the ambitions, anxieties, and artistry of two individuals determined to define themselves in a society that measured success in both wealth and refinement. Through its social life, Dizan became an emblem of what it meant to be a cultural elite in early 20th century America, a space where grandeur, influence, and personal vision intersected, revealing both the possibilities and the limits of extreme wealth in shaping human experience. By the late 1920s, the grandeur of Dizan had become both a source of pride and a looming shadow over the Ringling fortune. While the mansion stood as a testament to the family's taste, ambition, and social position, it also concealed a far more complicated reality: the staggering financial and logistical demands required to sustain such a palatial home. Every gilded ceiling, imported marble tile, and frescoed wall came with ongoing costs for maintenance, restoration, and skilled labor. The Ringlings, accustomed to wealth that seemed limitless during the circus empire's heyday, were confronted with the sobering truth that extreme luxury could become an invisible drain on even the most substantial fortunes. Dizan, in all its Venetian splendor, was as much a liability as it was a triumph, demanding constant attention, meticulous care, and financial vigilance that could never fully be relaxed. The expenses associated with the mansion were multi-layered and relentless. Mabel Ringling, whose eye for detail dictated that every aspect of the house reflect the highest standards of European craftsmanship, insisted on hiring specialized artisans, decorators, and conservators. Venetian glass chandeliers required periodic restoration to preserve their brilliance. Frescoes and murals needed the expertise of painters trained in classical techniques. Marble floors demanded continual polishing and protection from the humid Florida climate. Even seemingly mundane tasks, gardening, housekeeping, plumbing, became elevated endeavors, requiring teams of trained professionals to maintain the illusion of perfection. Dizan was, in essence, a living organism that demanded continuous feeding and attention, and the Ringlings were obliged to provide both without compromise. Beyond the physical maintenance, the mansion carried substantial social costs. The Ringlings had created a home that functioned not merely as a private residence but as a hub of cultural diplomacy, entertainment, and social influence. Invitations to visit Dizan were coveted, yet hosting such events placed enormous demands on the family and their staff. Lavish dinners, musical performances, and art exhibitions required careful orchestration. Menus had to be planned in coordination with seasonal ingredients. Seating arrangements meticulously considered, and the smallest details of decor, linen, flowers, lighting precisely executed. Each guest's arrival and departure were choreographed to ensure comfort, impress, and reinforce the Ringlings' cultivated image. In this way, hospitality became a form of labor as taxing as the physical upkeep of the mansion itself. binding the family's identity to the ongoing performance of wealth and taste. Financially, the Ringlings' fortune, though vast, was not inexhaustible. John Ringling's investments in real estate, art, and business ventures were considerable, but the costs of maintaining Cai Dizan began to compound rapidly during the late 1920s, coinciding with national economic instability. The Great Depression loomed on the horizon, threatening not only their liquidity, but also the societal structures upon which elite status depended. As revenues from circus enterprises fluctuated and the broader economy contracted, the mansion's expenses became an increasingly heavy burden. Every extravagant dinner, imported furnishing, and commissioned artwork was a reminder that Cai Dizan's magnificence came at a price that could no longer be taken for granted. The Ringlings' wealth, once a symbol of limitless possibility, was being channeled into the upkeep of a single property, whose demands were both immediate and unrelenting. This financial strain was exacerbated by the mansion's scale and complexity. The sprawling footprint of Cai Dizan included dozens of rooms, extensive gardens, stables, and waterfront terraces, all requiring specialized care. Electricity, plumbing, and climate control systems still modern. Innovations in the 1920s added layers of cost and vulnerability, as failures could threaten the preservation of delicate interiors or disrupt the social schedule. Labor alone represented a significant expenditure. A full-time domestic staff of housekeepers, cooks, gardeners, and maintenance personnel was essential, and additional temporary workers were often required for large gatherings. Each position carried wages, training, and management responsibilities, creating a financial ecosystem that mirrored the complexity of the mansion itself. Beyond monetary considerations, the mansion imposed psychological and emotional demands on the Ringlings. John and Mabel, despite their affection for the house, were acutely aware that Cai Dizan required constant supervision. Any lapse in attention, be it a maintenance issue, a delayed social event, or a mismanaged garden, risked undermining the careful image they had cultivated. The mansion became an unspoken taskmaster, imposing schedules, expectations, and obligations that left little room for spontaneity or retreat. In this sense, the very grandeur that inspired awe also generated anxiety, illustrating how wealth and beauty, when concentrated in a single locus, could become sources of personal tension as well as public admiration. Mabel, in particular, carried the weight of perfection. Her dedication to the aesthetic coherence of Cai Dizan was uncompromising. She personally oversaw interior decoration, commissioned artworks, and curated the mansion's furnishings, ensuring that every element from Venetian glass to Florentine tapestries aligned with her vision. This involvement was time-consuming and demanding, yet Mabel understood that the house was a reflection not only of personal taste, but also of social authority. Her meticulous oversight ensured that Cai Dizan retained its status as a premier example of American refinement. Yet it also amplified the pressures of stewardship, requiring constant vigilance, judgment, and negotiation with artisans and staff. The Ringlings' financial and social strategies were intertwined. While Cai Dizan was a private residence, it also functioned as an instrument for maintaining cultural influence. Hosting dignitaries, artists, and society figures reinforced the family's position in the elite networks that mattered most. Yet this visibility carried risks. Extravagant spending, mismanaged events, or public criticism could jeopardize reputation as easily as any financial misstep could threaten solvency. In balancing these priorities, the mansion became both an asset and a liability. Its splendor inseparable from the costs of maintaining appearances, sustaining operations, and negotiating the social expectations of early 20th century high society. As the Depression deepened, the mansion's financial demands became increasingly acute. Even as the Ringlings sought to protect their fortune through careful investment and judicious spending, the reality of maintaining a property of Cai Dizan's scale was undeniable. Repairs, renovations, and operational costs were fixed necessities. Income from other sources fluctuated. In many ways, the house consumed a portion of the fortune it had been intended to symbolize. transforming from a testament of wealth into a vehicle for ongoing expenditure, management, and responsibility. The Ringlings' experience illustrated a broader truth about elite homes in America: extreme luxury, while a mark of success, carried with it a unique and unrelenting set of obligations. Diana's financial strain extended beyond the Ringlings themselves to encompass the city of Sarasota. The mansion's construction and ongoing maintenance created employment opportunities, drawing skilled labor, artisans, and domestic staff to the region. Yet this economic interdependence also tethered the mansion's fortunes to those of the local economy, creating ripple effects whenever costs surged or operational challenges arose. In effect, Kaidisan became both a private investment and a public institution, its demands affecting not just the family but the broader community, reinforcing the notion that wealth, when concentrated in a singular monumental property, could never exist in isolation. Ultimately, Section 8 demonstrates that the majesty of Kaidisan was inseparable from its costs. Its grandeur, while celebrated, imposed financial, logistical, and emotional pressures that shaped the lives of John and Mabel Ringling, their staff, and the surrounding community. The mansion's beauty was inseparable from its burdens. Every fresco, gilded surface, and embroidered fixture carried hidden demands. In this way, Kaidisan exemplified the paradox of extreme wealth in America. The pursuit of magnificence brought status, influence, and admiration, yet it also required unceasing attention, resources, and sacrifice, transforming the dream of a palatial home into a perpetual negotiation between aspiration and reality. By the mid-1930s, the Ringlings were confronting the inevitable truth that Kaidisan, once a symbol of unrivaled wealth and sophistication, had become a weighty reflection of the fragility of fortune. The mansion, built to awe, to inspire, and to cement their place among America's elite, had quietly shifted from an emblem of triumph to a monument demanding constant vigilance. The Wall Street crash of 1929 and the ensuing Great Depression had eroded not only the broader economic landscape, but also the personal wealth that underpinned their extravagant lifestyle. Investments in real estate, art, and the circus itself, previously considered secure, were suddenly vulnerable to market forces, and the enormous operational costs of maintaining Kaidisan became impossible to ignore. The Ringlings had built a house that required near daily attention, and as revenues fell, the very grandeur of the mansion began to strain the family's finances, exposing the delicate balance between wealth and extravagance. John Ringling, who had devoted his life to building both the circus empire and the architectural legacy of Sarasota, understood that the family's financial security was at risk. Despite a career marked by shrewd business acumen, he found himself navigating an era in which fortunes could evaporate overnight. While the mansion's public image remained one of opulence and cultural refinement, privately, the Ringlings faced difficult decisions about how to sustain operations, preserve the estate, and maintain appearances. Every expenditure, from the wages of skilled artisans to the restoration of imported European furniture, was scrutinized. Yet the mansion's complexity rendered austerity almost impossible. Kaidisan demanded attention in ways that few other investments did. Neglecting maintenance could compromise the very structure of the house, both physically and socially, undermining decades of careful cultivation. Mabel Ringling, ever the steward of aesthetic perfection, bore a heavy portion of this responsibility. Her devotion to the mansion's visual integrity meant that she personally intervened in nearly every aspect of its upkeep, commissioning repairs, overseeing staff, and supervising decorative projects. Yet even her tireless management could not shield the family from the inexorable pressures of economic decline. The lavish social calendar, once a source of enjoyment and influence, became increasingly taxing. Hosting dignitaries, artists, and prominent figures carried both prestige and cost, and each event underscored the delicate balancing act required to maintain the appearance of wealth while navigating dwindling resources. Kaidisan, in this sense, became a symbol of both aspiration and vulnerability, a house whose magnificence demanded relentless effort, even as the means to sustain it were diminishing. Financial stress extended beyond the obvious operational costs to the broader implications of maintaining an elite lifestyle during a time of national hardship. The Great Depression not only constrained liquid assets, but also altered the social fabric that had once underpinned the Ringlings' influence. Elite gatherings, cultural patronage, and extravagant entertainments, which had reinforced their position in society, were increasingly out of step with the realities facing most Americans. Quai d'Orsay, in all its splendor, became a conspicuous reminder of inequality, and the pressure to justify its existence intensified. The Ringlings, who had once moved confidently within circles of wealth and power, now faced the challenge of preserving status without appearing insensitive or overindulgent, a challenge that further complicated both their finances and their social strategy. The mansion's very design contributed to its demands. Each room, terrace, and garden was meticulously curated, representing countless hours of labor and specialized knowledge. Venetian-style frescoes, gilded ceilings, and imported European furnishings required not only regular cleaning but expert restoration to prevent deterioration in the humid Florida climate. Gardens demanded constant horticultural attention, with rare plants and exotic flowers maintained through careful irrigation and seasonal planning. Even minor lapses in care could degrade the visual harmony carefully established by Mabel Ringling, making the mansion an ongoing responsibility rather than a static monument. In effect, the house itself acted as a constant taskmaster, reminding its owners daily that their wealth was inseparable from the work of sustaining it. As the economic climate worsened, the psychological toll on the Ringlings became more pronounced. The mansion, while a source of pride, was also a symbol of pressure, expectation, and exposure. John and Mabel were acutely aware that any decline in the estate's appearance, any disruption in its operations, or any misstep in hospitality could have repercussions for their reputation and social standing. In this sense, Quai d'Orsay functioned not just as a home but as a living test of endurance, demanding constant vigilance and attention to both material and social detail. The Ringlings' lives became inseparable from the mansion. Its upkeep dictated schedules, obligations, and emotional energy, creating a sense that the house itself was both custodian and overseer of their fortune. The strain of maintaining such an opulent residence was compounded by the changing composition of the Ringling family and their heirs. John and Mabel had no children, which meant that succession planning and the future of the estate were constant concerns. Decisions about inheritance, long-term care, and eventual preservation weighed heavily on the couple, as they sought to ensure that the vision embodied in Quai d'Orsay would survive beyond their lifetimes. This awareness of impermanence contrasted sharply with the mansion's intended symbolism of permanence and grandeur, creating a tension between legacy and reality that would define the later years of the Ringlings' occupancy. In addition to financial and social pressures, the mansion was subject to the physical vulnerabilities inherent to its coastal location. Hurricanes, flooding, and the humid climate posed persistent threats to the structural integrity of Quai d'Orsay. Windows, doors, and roofs required reinforcement. Exterior walls needed protection from moisture and salt air, and the gardens demanded careful management to prevent storm damage. Each natural event carried potential costs, both monetary and logistical, reinforcing the idea that maintaining such a house required not only wealth but foresight, resilience, and relentless labor. For the Ringlings, the mansion's beauty was inseparable from the vigilance demanded to preserve it. The cultural and artistic ambitions of Quai d'Orsay added another layer of complexity. John and Mabel had envisioned the mansion as a hub for art, music, and refinement, commissioning works from European artisans and curating collections that reflected their tastes and aspirations. Yet the acquisition, transportation, and maintenance of these artworks incurred ongoing costs. Paintings required careful framing and protection from humidity. Sculptures needed precise placement and security. Decorative objects demanded both display expertise and regular cleaning. The mansion's artistic ambitions, while enhancing its prestige, intensified the financial and operational burdens. making it clear that K. Dizan's splendor came at a constant cost. By the late 1930s, the cumulative weight of these factors, the economic downturn, operational demands, social obligations, and personal vigilance began to erode the Ringlings' ability to manage the estate with the same grandeur as in its early years. Kurdizan remained magnificent, yet its brilliance concealed a complex network of pressures, compromises, and relentless effort. The mansion's story became not only one of wealth and taste but also of endurance, adaptation, and the inexorable consequences of extreme luxury. In this way, Section 9 of Kurdizan's narrative illustrates the paradox of opulent estates. The very features that signify triumph, scale, artistry, and social prominence also generate vulnerabilities. John and Mabel Ringling's experience underscores the reality that grandeur is inseparable from obligation, that beauty requires stewardship, and that even the most formidable fortunes can be consumed, gradually and invisibly, by the relentless demands of maintaining a house designed to impress and endure. Kurdizan's magnificence, once a beacon of success, thus became a mirror reflecting the tension between aspiration and sustainability, a tension that would shape the estate's fate for generations to come. The final chapter of Kurdizan's story is inseparable from the twilight years of John and Mabel Ringling, whose lives were so intimately entwined with the mansion that its fate became their own. By the late 1930s, the pressures of maintaining such an opulent estate, compounded by the lingering effects of the Great Depression, had transformed the mansion from a joyous symbol of achievement into a relentless reminder of mortality, impermanence, and the finite nature of even the greatest fortunes. John, once confident in his ability to orchestrate both circus empires and architectural grandeur, found his energy waning under the strain of overseeing the estate, managing staff, and preserving the artistic vision that had defined Kurdizan. Mabel, whose devotion to the mansion had been tireless, confronted the reality that their dream home demanded constant labor, a demand that no longer aligned with their advancing ages or declining resources. The couple's dedication never wavered, but the enormity of the task became a silent companion, an unspoken tension that underscored every decision, every day, and every event held within the mansion's walls. Despite these challenges, Kurdizan retained its allure and cultural significance. The Ringlings' reputation as patrons of the arts and society's elite endured, even as their personal fortunes became increasingly strained. Visitors continued to marvel at the Venetian-inspired architecture, the hand-painted ceilings, the intricate woodwork, and the curated collections of European and Asian art that adorned each room. Yet beneath the surface, the mansion had become a complex ecosystem, requiring not only financial resources but deep personal investment and managerial skill. Maintaining the estate meant sustaining a staff of gardeners, domestic workers, curators, and security personnel, each dependent on the Ringlings' ability to fund their salaries and oversee operations. The mansion's scale and ambition created a reality in which every minute of attention, every allocation of funds became a reflection of both pride and vulnerability. The couple's social life, once filled with extravagant soirees, artistic gatherings, and visits from dignitaries, had gradually shifted in response to the economic realities and the limitations imposed by age. The ostentatious entertainments that had marked the 1920s gave way to more intimate, curated events that preserved the mansion's cultural role without overextending finances. These gatherings, while fewer in number, were still meticulously orchestrated, reflecting Mabel's insistence on beauty, harmony, and cultural sophistication. Artworks were displayed with precise attention to lighting and context. Gardens were maintained to bloom at key moments, and rooms were arranged to showcase both the mansion's aesthetic power and the Ringlings' refined taste. In these final years, Kurdizan became a living museum of its creator's ambitions, a space in which the mansion itself communicated the story of its owners' lives, choices, and priorities. As John Ringling's health declined, the question of legacy loomed ever larger. The couple had no children, and their vision for the estate's future required careful planning. John, acutely aware of the impermanence of wealth, made deliberate arrangements to ensure that Kay Dizan would survive beyond his lifetime. He began the process of transferring assets and establishing the mechanisms that would allow the estate to endure, reflecting both his foresight and his desire to preserve the Ringlings' cultural contributions. The mansion, which had once been a private sanctuary, increasingly became a symbol of public significance, an embodiment of their philanthropic and artistic aspirations. In this sense, John's final years were defined not merely by the management of a home, but by the orchestration of a legacy, a recognition that the beauty of Kay Dizan could outlive the fleeting presence of its creators. Mabel Ringling, who outlived John by several years, assumed the role of custodian with quiet determination. Her devotion to Kay Dizan never faltered, and she took personal responsibility for maintaining the mansion's integrity, overseeing staff, and ensuring that the collection of art, furniture, and decorative objects remained in pristine condition. Her stewardship extended beyond physical maintenance. It included the careful management of the mansion's public image, balancing the desire to preserve privacy with the recognition that Kay Dizan held cultural and historical importance. Through her efforts, the estate continued to operate at a level of excellence that reflected both the original vision and the ongoing dedication required to maintain such an extraordinary property. During this period, Kay Dizan also began to attract attention from historians, architects, and cultural institutions who recognized its unique value as a testament to Gilded Age ambition and artistry. The mansion was no longer merely a private residence. It had become a cultural artifact, a repository of the era's social dynamics, aesthetic preferences, and economic realities. Scholars marveled at the blend of Mediterranean revival architecture, Venetian details, and Florida-specific adaptations that made Kay Dizan both distinctive and instructive. Each fresco, gilded ceiling, and imported decorative piece offered insight into the Ringlings' tastes, travels, and social aspirations, rendering the mansion an educational resource as well as a monument to personal achievement. The transition from private residence to historical treasure began subtly during Mabel's later years, as she entertained discussions about preservation and public access. While still deeply committed to privacy, she understood the inevitability that Kay Dizan's significance extended beyond the family. Her willingness to consider the mansion's future as a cultural institution laid the groundwork for the eventual transformation into a museum, ensuring that the estate would educate and inspire future generations rather than fall into neglect or private obscurity. This foresight underscored the Ringlings' understanding that true legacy lies not solely in possession but in preservation, stewardship, and the careful transmission of cultural value. After Mabel's death in 1929, the estate entered a period of transition. Management responsibilities were assumed by trustees and preservationists who were charged with safeguarding the mansion, its collections, and its gardens. These efforts reflected the recognition that Kay Dizan was not merely a house but a living narrative of American wealth, ambition, and artistry. Restoration work became a central focus, addressing decades of wear and damage while remaining faithful to the original designs. Artworks were cataloged and conserved, decorative surfaces repaired, and structural improvements implemented to mitigate the effects of time and Florida's challenging climate. Each intervention was guided by the principle that the mansion's integrity, historical, aesthetic, and cultural, must be maintained, ensuring that future generations could experience the space as John and Mabel intended. In the decades following the Ringlings' deaths, Kay Dizan became a symbol of Florida's cultural heritage and a centerpiece of the state's historical preservation efforts. Public tours allowed visitors to experience the grandeur firsthand, walking through rooms adorned with Venetian plaster, gilded ceilings, and period furnishings, while expansive gardens provided a living link to the Ringlings' original vision. The mansion's story, the ambitious creation, the financial strain, the personal devotion, and the eventual preservation resonated with audiences, illustrating broader themes of wealth, art, and the passage of time. Kay Dizan stood not merely as a relic of individual achievement, but as a testament to the intersection of human ambition and historical circumstance. A structure whose significance transcended the fortunes that had once fueled it. Today, Gilded Age endures as both a museum and a monument, a testament to the Ringling's vision, taste, and determination. Its preservation demonstrates the power of foresight and stewardship, reflecting the couple's recognition that beauty and artistry require ongoing care, and that legacy is built not only through creation but through protection and interpretation. Visitors who walk through its halls or wander its gardens encounter more than architecture and decoration. They encounter the story of a family whose ambition reshaped the landscape of Sarasota, whose personal dedication preserved the arts, and whose mansion, once a reflection of wealth and desire, has become a lasting emblem of cultural significance. In this way, the final section of Gilded Age's story encapsulates both the triumph and the cautionary lesson of the Ringling's endeavor. The mansion consumed a family fortune, demanded relentless attention, and embodied the tensions between ambition, luxury, and sustainability. Yet through foresight, stewardship, and eventual public engagement, it transformed from a private burden into a shared treasure. Gilded Age remains a testament to the enduring power of vision, the labor required to maintain grandeur, and the ways in which history, art, and personal aspiration converge in a space that continues to captivate the imagination nearly a century after its creation. The mansion, once a symbol of both aspiration and vulnerability, now stands as an immortal narrative, preserving the memory of the Ringlings and offering a window into the lives, ambitions, and artistry of one of America's most remarkable Gilded Age families.